Hi, everybody. I hope you're keeping well. My name is Laurence Smith. I'm co-coordinator of the Pathways project together with Harry Blockhus and Diana Delibera at SLU. I'm really delighted to be able to talk to you today in the first of this seminar series, which we'll be holding every month to sort of foster team spirit within the project and to let everyone know what everyone else is up to in terms of getting on with the tasks and the delivery of Pathways. So I was asked to deliver a presentation today which would remind people about the project concepts to sort of try and provide the red thread that sort of links the tasks and activities across all of the work packages. So I'm going to attempt to do that today and do justice to all of the excellent input that we had when we were developing the proposal. So just as a reminder, the core objectives of Pathways are to develop a holistic assessment that can do justice to livestock systems from farm to fork, and identify and evaluate innovations of livestock farming throughout Europe, working with a group of practice hubs. And we'll also be working together to co-design scenarios and transition pathways with multi-actors for a sustainable sector and support an effective transition to sustainability through ensuring a project legacy. And essentially, we're moving along this trajectory from current systems to future pathways by defining the current situation, assessing the current situation and developing scenarios and evaluating innovations to inform the development of pathways at the end. So today I'll be providing an overview of these sort of three core concepts that are defined in the proposal and the description of work, and looking at how each of these three concepts listed on this slide relate to the key project tasks and how they can inform recommendations that we develop moving forward. So the first core concept that you can see listed on that slide is the one of trade-offs and synergies. And within this core concept, we have worked with the SAFA guidelines that are produced by the FAO. It stands for Sustainability Assessment of Food and Agriculture System Guidelines, that covers the four areas of governance, environment, social, and economy, as you can see listed here. Now, within each of these four areas, there are a number of categories or themes, essentially, that define sustainability within food systems. And we use those within previous work to develop an assessment tool that's very much core to a lot of the assessments we'll be doing with the practice hubs. And this tool is called the public goods tool that we'll be applying within this project. You can see here results from earlier work where we use this tool to assess about 60 pasture-fed livestock farms in the UK. What the tool does is, using the SAFA framework, we can show how a farm or group of farms is performing around different criteria of sustainability on a 1 to 5 scale. As you can see here, this is the average from the 57 farms and the low and the high scores across the range of farms. We can also use raw data within the tool, public goods tool, and within field data to see which clusters emerge from groups of innovative practitioners. So here within the same project where we assessed the 57, we can see there's a heat map that we produced using information that we collected within the tool alongside field data. What this heat map shows essentially is individual farm numbers, so farm IDs on the right-hand side, and the values that were returned within the tool from farm visits where we interviewed the farmers, and from field data that we collected from the fields on the farms. The cluster technique that we used here forms these natural groups that are indicated on this slide, with the top cluster showing high values for membership years, indicated here with this MEM column, and high values for things like grassland height and species richness, and the bottom cluster having high costs, variable costs being relating to things like fertilizer and feed, and also low values for membership years. So some interesting trends were emerging from this analysis that was based on this multi-criteria assessment. We can also use things like correlation plots to look at relationships between variables from PG tool and other data. So here within the same project, we were able to look at the relationship between species richness and total costs. So showing here in this core plot that's produced within R, which shows that essentially as species richness was increasing, vet costs were decreasing and vice versa. So quite an interesting trend there in terms of these grassland farmers. And then similarly, we could see some quite strong relationships occurring on the economic and agri-environment and housing conditions side. So this sort of multivariate analysis is really interesting from a policy point of view in terms of seeing what sort of things may be connected and how we can build on some of these interactions in terms of the recommendations that come out. The trade-offs theme also extends to the circular economy and ecosystem service aspects. So this is very much key to the work that will be taking place in Work Package 2 and Work Package 6. So in terms of looking at the solution space for livestock systems when we consider the interactions with co-products and landscape, as well as things like the natural water and the environment. So exploring the multifaceted role of livestock in this ecosystem service concept is really key to the project as well, and sits within this first theme. So the second core concept of Pathways is the one of enabling transition or leverage points. And this is building on the work of the US social scientist Donella Meadows, who was a very influential thinker, teacher, writer, journalist, and farmer as well. So quite a diverse background. And she had she worked at Harvard University for quite a few years, but went on to found her own institute. And the sort of basis of Meadows' argument was that essentially a lot of the work that we're doing in sustainability science is essentially rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. So a metaphor for clearly sort of wasting time and getting obsessed with the wrong things. So Meadows was saying that essentially what we're doing and what we have done in the past is focus on hard system interventions that target symptoms, not causes, and that this isn't working because we're still seeing extreme rates of climate change and also biodiversity loss, as well as huge losses to the environment with regards to nitrogen, for example. So the suggestion from Meadows was that despite all the evidence pointing towards the damage that's caused by things like fossil fuel use, we're not seeing the reductions that we need to move towards sustainability. So instead of changing systems, we're sort of accepting them. Meadows suggested that we need a more systemic understanding of sustainability interventions that are available, and she highlights the value of a leverage points approach in this context. What this suggests is that if you're trying to move a system that's, say, a food system in our case, it's pictured here on the bottom left, yes, sure, we can target things like materials, so inputs, processes, so farm practices, but these are relatively shallow in terms of their potential for affecting change. Meadows suggests that instead, things like designs and intents, so goals, information flows, and mindsets have a much deeper leverage potential, but these aspects are under-researched. So within Pathways, we're very much interested in these sort of design and intent aspects, or these sort of deeper leverage points, and how we can identify those through interaction with the practice hubs in particular, as well as through the multi-actor platform, to look at what's working in terms of affecting change. And we're doing this by building on a paper published by David Abson at Leuphana University in Germany, who suggests that Meadows' thinking can be classified into 3 realms of leverage. David Abson talks about this restructure realm of leverage, which constitutes institutional reform, collapse, and renewal. So thinking about how, as one institute collapses, new and more productive and meaningful and effective structures can take its place. Abson also talks about the reconnect area, whereby mindful connections between people and ecosystems can foster change, and the rethink area, where production and reuse of knowledge, especially in transdisciplinary processes, can help to encourage change. So thinking across these sort of 3 realms of leverage is very much key to this second core concept in terms of identifying what works. We tried applying the Abson framework within a recent UK project as well. So we brought together farmers, researchers, policymakers, and NGOs together within a workshop of about 40 people in the UK, where we explored interventions that already have happened in the recent past across these 3 areas: rethink, reconnect, and restructure, and produced a sort of policy guidance note, as well as a paper that's currently under review, whereby we tried to classify some of these interventions, such as engaging farmers in research, reconnecting citizens through farm walks and so on, and restructuring institutes such as our Department for Agriculture post-Brexit. So we feel this has been a really useful exercise in terms of identifying what works well and what could be promoted moving forward. Leverage points can also be identified through techniques like fuzzy cognitive mapping. So within another project, we identified levers for change through essentially bringing together farmers and asking them to map their system in terms of the most influential or important elements. And this was done through the technique of FCM, fuzzy qualitative mapping, whereby we asked the farmers to identify firstly the most important factors for their production system and how those interact with each other. And so the size of the blobs is indicative of the number of interactions or the importance of these different elements. And so within this group of pasture-fed agroecological farmers, we can see that vegetation and soil health were very central aspects, with things like number of farm events, renewable energy use having less importance in terms of the centrality. So through this approach, we can sort of see what's most important for the farmer, essentially in terms of thinking about how they're making decisions and what's at the forefront of their mind. Interestingly, when we did the same thing as with the conventional beef farmers in this case, we found that a lot of the levers that were mentioned, or a lot of the most important factors, are related to external aspects like environmental regulations and climate change targets, whereas with the agroecological producers, the elements that were brought to the fore were related to things internal to the farm, which was quite an interesting finding. So that was the leverage points concept, which encapsulates a lot, I know, as the first theme, but it's a very exciting area and under-researched. So the third core concept of one welfare, I must admit, is the area that I know the least about in terms of my own engagement with it. But the one welfare approach, which is described in this paper, which I've taken the image from here, essentially is looking at the interactions between animal welfare, human well-being, and environment conservation. And similar to SAFA, it sort of defines these in more detail using a number of sort of themes and categories. And it's encapsulated nicely by this quote here, and it's been promoted quite widely in Europe, particularly by some celebrities, as shown here on the bottom right. So one welfare is a fairly new concept, which essentially has been used in recent years, and this particular study is a good example of how it can be used to look at how human and animal and societal health interact. So this was a study that was published in 2020 that looked at the impacts of COVID-19 on livestock production. And what they found was that in the US, many processing plants shut down because of the pandemic. And at one stage, there was a massive reduction in processing capacity, which resulted in overcrowding and very poor conditions for the animals, which caused suffering and upset to the workers and the owners, and of course, the economic impact associated with that. So this was a valuable example of how one welfare can be applied, particularly to look at these interactions within food systems. Okay, so on this slide, I've attempted to show how different tasks within the Pathways project relate to these three core themes. And this is by no means complete. This is just a sort of best attempt really to think about where the individual tasks could lie. And these are just some examples rather than a complete list. But what we can see is that some tasks, like the mapping of visions in WP1, cover all three themes, whereas others, they sit more strongly in one or two of the themes, like the macroeconomic assessments in work package 2. So essentially, I think what we can use these three themes for is to have this sort of red thread that runs through the project, and to show how the different tasks and their outputs are addressing the gaps relating to one welfare, sustainability, trade-offs, and the interactions therein, and enabling transition. So, as I say, this gives you an idea of where these different tasks lie, and potentially how they could pick up on these themes in the reports and the publications that are coming out. Another key aspect of the project is very strongly related to the themes is the European multi-actor platform that is being formed as we speak. And this is a group of 50 supply chain actors that's being organized around the three themes, and includes the post-farm gate industry, but also NGOs, consumer associations, and crucially, the DGs, so DG Agri, Environment, RTD, etc., as well as the research community. And they'll be reflecting on our work essentially over the lifetime of the project, as well as providing their own visions for livestock systems in 2050 to inform our recommendations. This is a really key part of the project, as well as I say, it's very strongly related, as we'll be organising the 50 members over these three themes. Okay, so I thought I'd put this slide in here because I think a key question for me is how we can use these three core concepts to develop or in the development of our knowledge outputs and knowledge products. So I think could potentially be very valuable to think about how we relate these aspects to the living labs, for example, thinking, for example, about how we could learn from the living labs in terms of what's working well with regard to driving behavior change. So what has worked well in terms of other farmers coming on board with that lab, for example. Can we think about how the sustainability aspect relates to the practice hubs, for example, which elements of sustainability are particularly addressed, and so on. So I think thinking about how these concepts run through the project doesn't just extend to the research, but also to the innovation and knowledge exchange aspects throughout the life of the project. Something that someone suggested was also to try and think about social media engagement along the lines of these three core themes, like hashtag one welfare, hashtag leverage points, etc. It's not something I'm that familiar with. Obviously, I need to get on the case, but I think this could be really valuable as well in terms of having a consistent dialogue over the coming 4.5 years. So in summary, the Pathways core concepts of sustainability, trade-offs, leverage points, and one welfare give a really good opportunity to carry out and report on project outputs under core themes and to have a consistent narrative over the different work packages and tasks. And increasing the visibility of each theme within these tasks and the reports and knowledge exchange that build on them will really help us to ensure impact in terms of having this core message that can really get through to the policy community and to, of course, to farmers and to the researchers. And the overlap and the interaction across these themes could also provide for a very engaging, convincing, and transformative dialogue around recommendations and lead to really effective pathways to ensure sustainability in European food systems. So here are the key references that I've referred to throughout this presentation. So the Dave Abson paper on leverage points, the FAO, SAFA guidelines, as well as the Keystone One Welfare paper and the paper by Hannah van Zanten and colleagues, which talks in particular about the defining of a sustainable land boundary for livestock. So do take a look at those, and I hope you can provide access to those or links to them at least through this seminar page, which I will be able to provide access to via the Teams site. So thank you very much for listening to me, and please do get in touch if you want to discuss anything I've talked about today. And if you haven't already, please make sure you follow us on social media and check out the website, which I think looks fantastic. So thank you again, and look forward to speaking soon.